Hi there, this is Eshu. I'm the abbot here at Zenwest Buddhist Society. This Living Zen-podcast is just one of the many resources we've created at Zenwest to make Zen practice and training more available and accessible to people all over the world. Instructional videos, printable resources, and much, much more are also available on our website at www.zenwest.ca. If you're a regular listener, I'd love to hear from you. So please drop me an email at office@zenwest.ca and let me know who you are, how you got started, and what brought you to Zen. Everything we make available in person and online at Zenwest is only possible because of the support of our members and associates, people like you. If the efforts of our community are making a difference in your life, I'd like to invite you to show your support and take part in making it happen by becoming an associate or member of the Zenwest Sangha. You can do this by clicking the Join Us tab on our website at www.zenwest.ca. Thank you for your support, and thanks for listening. So I just wanted to start this morning with thank you, and just asking that you be patient with me as I sort of integrate the changes that have taken place over the past several years. And this is going to include changes to form and changes to chanting and changes to the way that we do things. There's been a lot of changes. When a person becomes a temple priest, it isn't like, the Catholic tradition or something like this where the Mass is laid out in a particular format and the job of the priest is to sort of do that standard form no matter where they are. In the Zen tradition, we really emphasize this practice of awakening. And when we have a Dharma teacher, the understanding is that the environment is something that is dynamic. And so it doesn't make sense for you to teach something which is static, to take it from one place to the other and just teach it like that, regardless of who is there. It requires insight, it requires wisdom to be able to transform what you have been given into what is appropriate for the circumstance. And so always here at Zenwest, I've done that. In the past, I was trained at Rinzai-ji in the Rinzai-ji form. And when I came to Victoria first, there were a lot of other things that were actually also mixed in. I didn't know that when I first came, but after I had gone to Rinzai-ji and practiced at the monastery and came back, I went, where did this come from? And where did that come from? And fortunately, at the time, there were some people who could say, so-and-so practiced in the Kaplo tradition, that's why we chant the affirming faith mind, because at the beginning they were one of the big people here, so that was one of the big things that they liked to do. And Kaplo's line, where did Hakuin come in? That came from there too, because they don't chant it at Rinzai-ji. And so as I moved in the Victoria Zen Center, which it was at the time, how do you integrate? How do you harmonize this practice? And there's a lot of things to consider. One is people who have been here for a long time and they're used to things being a certain way. And boy, people don't like to change things. And then another aspect is you want to bring the practice of a center to the place where it is harmonious with the lineage or with the tradition that you practice within. The idea being that if there's a person practicing here and they say, I really want to go and do sesshin over there at the head temple or the monastery or whatever, they shouldn't go from here to there and find it completely different, like just nothing's the same. There should be some harmony there. So one of the things that I've done here in Victoria is that most of the liturgy that we do with the aforementioned additions of affirming faith, mind, and Hakuin, From the Rinzai-ji tradition, the form that we use is almost, I shouldn't say almost identical, but it's very similar. It's very close to the monastic form. The chanting, though, is almost all in English here, and there is absolutely not a touch of English in the Rinzai-ji tradition. And that's something that I feel that we don't really have any Japanese first language speakers in our community. We are in Canada, and I felt, I think that we should be chanting in English because these things that we chant are actually important teachings. So now it brings us to today. And over the past couple of years, I've started to practice with Genjo Osho at Choboji, and now I'm an Osho in that lineage. And so I have a responsibility, both as the teacher in this community, to sort of harmonize the practice that we do here, to tweak it a little bit with, to make it more harmonious with the practice that they do at Choboji, so that for the people who want to flow there, who want to engage in practice there, and it's so close and so convenient and so affordable, that I hope everybody wants to do that, that you should go there and feel like it's not completely foreign. However, it is also my responsibility as a teacher to maintain form and to engage in practice here in a way that I feel is effective and harmonious with my own insight. So there are many things that we're going to do that are going to be different than they do at Choboji, because this temple is my responsibility as Osho here. There is also some ceremonial functions which, as Osho, I'm supposed to be doing, or I'm encouraged to do. And so I'm trying to sort of wrap my head around all of that and sort that all out. So it's the metaphor that came up for me this morning was like, drinking coffee at a restaurant and that the server keeps coming by and saying, "Can I top you up?" And the mix is always getting my sugar and cream and all that, I've got to sort of keep this balance going, and this server keeps coming with more black coffee. So that's kind of what it feels like for me. And so I'm sure it feels that way sometimes for you. You don't know what you're going to be doing. But in some ways, this is a wonderful practice format to be sort of prepared with what you think you're going to be doing, but to be able to let it go and to shift. Now, you can take comfort in the fact that I'm not ever going to insert like Beatles tunes, well, maybe, you never know, or anything totally outrageous into the liturgy, but there may be some changes as we go forward. Okay. Recently, there's been just a period over the summer of some instability in the sitting. Going forward into 2014, I've really tried to set up a calendar that allows for a lot more stability, even taking into account, ceremonies that need to happen and holidays that happen and all that kind of stuff. Trying to create a more stable practice environment. The past 2 weeks we've been engaged in the meditation challenge, which I think the response that I've gotten is that people were ready for it and people wanted it and people have engaged with it very strongly. And the participation in the Sunday sits has jumped since starting it. So I think it's a wonderful thing. People are engaging. The other thing that has been coming up is that people have been asking questions that you're saying, I'd like to learn more about Buddhism, or I want to know more about Buddhism. And I think it's a really great thing. And every time someone says this, I'm like, what do you mean you want to know more about Buddhism? We practice it here all the time. But certainly I think that it is important to investigate the teachings of the Buddha. We are a tradition or a lineage or a sect, if you like, of Buddhism. And so I think it's important for us to go back time after time to the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha to investigate what it is that we're engaged in doing. My hope today, I can't get too into it because I have talked for a week on this particular piece that I'm going to read today. But I think that I'd like to sort of tie it into why it is that we do what we do and how it relates to Buddhism, because I don't always think it's entirely obvious. Another thing that I'd like to sort of just put out there is I'm sort of pondering like the idea of a monthly sort of Dharma study group so that we could look at a particular teaching and read it. Maybe I don't know totally the format. Maybe I could give a talk on it or something like this during the course of the month, and then once a month we could get together and sort of talk about that piece. It's still totally conceptual, but if you're interested, just sort of, I guess email me is the easiest thing. Just let me know. That goes for the people out in, members out in internet land as well. So today I'm going to read from the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. Yeah, the discourse of turning the wheel of the Dharma. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to read the first part of it. This is the first discourse that the Buddha gave. So after he had this great awakening experience, he sought out the 5 ascetics that he had practiced with before he left ascetic practice. And when he found them, he knew that these people were determined, highly disciplined, experienced seekers. And so he thought, of all people, and they have a relationship with me, they know me, they trust me, they know my character intimately through practice. So he sought them out, and this was the first there's a wonderful story, one of my favorite stories, but I won't tell it because I want to get to the sutra. And so this is what he said to them when they asked sort of what he had realized. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Varanasi in the deer park at Isipatana. There the Blessed One addressed the monks of the group of 5 thus: Monks, these 2 extremes should not be followed by one who has gone forth into homelessness. What 2? The pursuit of sensual happiness in sensual pleasures, which is low, vulgar, the way of worldlings, ignoble, unbeneficial, and the pursuit... that's one. The pursuit of sensual happiness in sensual pleasures, which is low, vulgar, the way of worldlings, ignoble, and unbeneficial. And the pursuit of self-mortification, which is painful, ignoble, unbeneficial. Without veering toward either of these extremes, the Tathagata has awakened to the middle way, which gives rise to vision, which gives rise to knowledge, and leads to peace, to direct knowledge, to awakening, to nibbana. And what, monks, is that middle way attained by the Tathagata? It is this noble eightfold path, that is, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This, monks, is that middle way awakened to by the Tathagata, which gives rise to vision, which gives rise to knowledge, and leads to peace, to direct knowledge, to awakening, to nibbana. Now this, monks, is the noble truth of suffering. Birth is suffering. Aging is suffering. Illness is suffering. Death is suffering. Union with what is displeasing is suffering. Separation from what is pleasing is suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. In brief, the 5 aggregates subject to clinging are suffering. Now this, monks, is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. It is this craving that leads to renewed existence, accompanied by delight and lust, seeking delight here and there, that is, craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, craving for extermination. Now this, monks, is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. It is the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving, the giving up and relinquishing of it, freedom from it, non-attachment. Now this, monks, is the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. It is this noble eightfold path that is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. That's as far as I'm going to go. That's the whole sermon. The Buddha then talks about how he encountered these, practiced with these, and had realization through these 4 noble truths. One of the things that whenever I talk about the noble truths or the noble eightfold path is I like to talk about this word noble a little bit. I mention it a lot, so please, again, if I've talked about it before and you're bored to tears, just sort of be patient. This word noble, or arya in Sanskrit, arya, it's an interesting word in context. It's the same word that Adolf Hitler used to describe the sort of master race, Aryan. It means sort of like high or noble or sort of elite, I guess. And at the time of the Buddha in India, and still to this day, there is a very rigid caste system in place. And so the idea of this is that all beings are born from the body of Brahma, or God, if you like. And depending on which part of the body of Brahma that you're born from, you will be born into a particular family and into a particular caste. It is your birth that determines this. So if you're born from, I think it's Brahma's head, you will be born into the Brahmin caste, which is the caste of priests. It's the highest. Your father is a Brahmin, and you are a Brahmin too. And you have certain social privileges that no other caste has. It is by birth. And then I think it's like out of the, I can't remember where the body parts are, but the next one down is the warrior caste. And this is where most of the kings and royals and sort of powerful leaders come from. This is the caste that Siddhartha Gautama was born into. And again, this nobility of caste is something that you are born into, something that you're born with. And as we go down the body parts, you know, like the coming out of the legs and the feet and all that kind of stuff, and you're born into the merchant caste or the servant caste or the untouchable caste. The amount of Arya, nobility, kind of diminishes. And it's a rigid system, so you might be the wealthiest merchant in the whole world, but your nobility is always going to be less than somebody who's born into the warrior caste or the Brahmin caste. And that's the world that the Buddha lived in. So this teaching of the 4 noble truths, this idea that is, Stephen Batchelor liked to use to translate the 4 noble truths as the 4 ennobling truths, or the ennobling eightfold path. The teaching that the Buddha came up with, the teaching or what he offered in this turning of the Dharma wheel, this idea that nobility didn't have to do with your birthright. It had to do with how able you are to realize these truths and to walk this path. It is the realization of these truths that make one Arya, noble. It is the walking of this path of awakening that makes one noble, Arya. And there are several times where he gives teachings or has debates, interactions with people from various castes, where he sort of lays this out. He gives these examples of, well, you have an untouchable who, respects his elders and is constantly generous and is always pointed on the path of virtue and of awakening, and you have a Brahman who has murdered his brother and rapes women and steals from his uncle and all these kinds of things. Can you say that this Brahman is the more noble of the two? And so he really sort of flipped things on their heads. The order that he created of Buddhism, we do this practice of shaving our heads. We do this practice of leaving our clothes, our personal clothes, aside and wearing this uniform, a kind of uniform. Even for lay people in our center, I ask that people leave their personal clothing at home and wear this uniform. And this arises from this leveling principle of there are so many ways that we identify our social order, the way that we wear our hair, the kind of jewelry that we wear, the kind of clothing that we wear. The order was one in which all people from all castes were welcome, and they made community and participated together equally. There was this profound and very detailed process of the sharing of resources, which in India, particularly at the time, for untouchables and Brahmin caste people to be sharing a meal together, eaten with their hands out of the same bowls and everything like this was completely radical. The Buddha was a revolutionary, and many people were very upset by just their presence and existence. So we have to sort of understand this teaching in that context, that when he's talking about four ennobling truths, an ennobling eightfold path, he's talking about something radical here. What an idea. So I often talk about the first and second ennobling truths. And these are important to really grasp. And I think that for most people who have come to practice, there's something that we have to one degree or another realized. One is that fundamentally the word is dukkha, that is translated as suffering or anguish, dissatisfactoriness. All things that we experience are transitory in nature. And so because we so want things to stay, that very transitoriness really leads us to suffer. So in that way, we have this glorious birth. Wonderful, a child is born, our child is born, or our grandchild is born. And we say, wonderful. And it's a beautiful thing to see a child be born. But in that very moment, the same moment, their entire life, illness, poverty, starvation, disease, and death, all of these possibilities are simultaneously born in the same moment as that glorious birth. And if we're awake, it all hits us at once, whether we're aware of it or not. Every circumstance, every situation, every happening that we have is this same thing. I always tell the story of, the man who sees there's a sort of a material example. He sees the 2013 Mercedes and says, "Oh, I want it. How wonderful it would be, and it would make me so happy to have this beautiful car." So he looks at his budget and he figures, okay, if I save this much money for so many months, I'll be able to get my Mercedes. So he does it. He's really disciplined all year long, and finally, September rolls around and he's got the money and he goes to the Mercedes dealership and, he pays the man and he's just, whoa, so excited, he's got the Mercedes. And he hops in the car and he fires, whoa, yeah. And he's about to pull out of the parking lot, and the truck bringing the 2014 model pulls in front of the dealership, and immediately, this car sucks. And this is the circumstance that we find ourselves in over and over again, that we put our satisfaction on something that is sort of in the future. We aim towards being satisfied by some circumstance or some object or some relationship, and we chase it. And it's not that we don't accomplish things, we don't reach those things, but if we are to reflect on our lives, on the many things that we've pursued and accomplished, we have to look at how long that profound sense of satisfaction, completeness, and wholeness last. And isn't it the case that as soon as we're able to sort of tuck that thing into our pocket or into our toolbox, we start to look around again and say, what's next? The example in Zen that's given is a monkey who's in the trees and he sees a piece of fruit, and so he swings over to the tree and picks the piece of fruit and says, "Oh, wonderful." But then from there he can see another piece of fruit. So he puts the piece of fruit under his arm and swings over to the other tree, and that one drops out, and he gets there and goes, "Ah, great," and picks it, and then he sees another one, and just the same thing over and over again. And this is so in the sutra here, it says, the Buddha says, birth is suffering, aging is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering, union with what is displeasing is suffering. Having to go to the relative's house for Thanksgiving, suffering. Being away from the things that you like, that's always suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. In brief, the 5 aggregates, the 5 skandhas, form. These are things. The Heart Sutra is in this sutra is in the Heart Sutra. It's kind of hidden or condensed, I guess you could say. But form, sensation, dispositions, all that stuff. Let me find it here. See, this is one of the downsides of chanting so many different versions, is that it's difficult to keep them straight because I know them in different ways. 5 skandhas. Form, sensation, perception, dispositions, and consciousness. Everything, all of our perceptions are nothing but this dissatisfaction. Our dissatisfaction, the origin of suffering, the origin of dukkha, is craving. This craving, it's often pointed out, this craving, it depends on something. It depends on this clinging that's mentioned in the first ennobling truth. The clinging is based on this perception of incompleteness or separateness or individuality, self. Based on this sense of self and separation, we feel incomplete. And so we are always striving after completion or wholeness, I guess we could say. So we look at the world outside of us and we say, if I just had that, I would be complete, I would be fulfilled, and I would be happy. There's another side of things, and so we call that the craving of desire. But there's another craving, which is the craving of aversion. And the way that we experience this is, if I could just get rid of that, or if I could just stop doing that, or if I could stop wanting that, then I would be complete. So according to the teaching of Buddhism, although it seems like we're pushing away, this is also called craving, desire, based on the idea that we can get rid of something, that we can be separate. So both of these two things are embodied in the Dharma wheel. In the center of the Dharma wheel, the arising of birth and death. Go ahead. Yeah, you can change your posture if you'd like. So, if you see a Dharma wheel, they often have the realms and the cycles of birth and death and all that stuff all around. They're quite complex. Although we have quite a beautiful one right here on our own Butsudan. This is Dylan Thomas's Dharma wheel. So at the center, you see we've got this 3 things going around in a circle. And often in the Tibetan ones, you see a pig and a rooster and a snake. And those represent ignorance or fundamental confusion, desire and craving, and anger or aversion, right? So we have these represented just by these sort of colorful, swirly, sort of paisley things. I always, anyways. And so this is what's being pointed to in these 2 truths, is that we have the ignorance or the fundamental confusion. This is a pig in the traditional one, because I read that the pig, his ears grow so big that they flop down in front of their face, and so pigs don't see well. They can sort of see what's in front of them to eat, but they can't look around because they've got these big ears in front of their face. And then desire and aversion. So these are both craving. So based on this continuous cycle of not being able to see things as they are, and our desire, manifested both as craving and aversion, this suffering is brought in, and it's a sort of unvirtuous cycle. It just goes around and around and around. And this is what leads to all birth and death, all of the experiences that we have, all of the suffering that happens. And this is in the Dharma wheel. We have this sort of the 6 realms sort of represented. And as long as we're engaged in that, as long as we're shackled to that by our own ignorance, there is no escape. And this is the difference in how the cosmos is perceived in Buddhism compared to how sort of the Judeo-Christian world perceives the cosmos. In the Christian cosmos, I think that birth or life, the life that we have, our existence on this planet, is something which is relatively finite. It's very short. And I think that there's this idea that we have a soul. And when we die, if we lead a virtuous life, our soul will be taken to heaven. So all we need to do is live a decent life, be kind to our brothers, and accept salvation, I guess, and we go to heaven after we die. Rest, I guess you could say. The perspective of Buddhism is that this cycle of ignorance binds us. We are bound to the world. We are bound to this cycle of birth and death. And it's endless. And even if we live a virtuous life, we might be born into a better situation. We might be born into a life of greater ease than the one that we have now, where resources will be more abundant. But even in this philosophical understanding of the cosmos, there is this recognition that, but the difficulty is when circumstances get better, when we have more resources, when we have more money, when we have an easier circumstance, our perspective, our relationship with those around us, with the world at large, becomes more and more ignorant. We become more focused on ourselves. We become more focused on preserving our comfort. And as a result, our conduct becomes less and less virtuous. And we start to go the other way. We start to have this livelihood of diminishing returns. So we have this cycle of rebirths, and we can understand it in the context of many lifetimes, like transmigrating the realms from the, heavenly realm of the Hollywood starlet where, all is champagne and roses to, all the way down to the other side, the hellish realms of the starving child in the war-torn country, and around, multiple lifetimes. But we don't have to get into that kind of metaphysical stuff. We can even look that there are many circumstances in an individual life where this full spectrum, from the person without any cares at all in the world, to the person who is living relatively comfortably, to the person who is out on the street relying on social services, to the person who is addicted, destitute, and dying in a gutter. This is a single lifetime. Round and around. And the teaching in this first noble truth is that if we don't realize, if we don't awaken, that this cycle is unbreakable, it's endless. We might be doing great right now, but if we're doing great right now, we're just moving towards the circumstance where it becomes untenable and we start to make mistakes and we start to not see things and we begin to behave in ways which create suffering and misery for ourselves and other, and around it goes. The word for this is called samsara. That's the world we live in. And its opposite, or its flip, is called nibbana, or you've heard it as nirvana. And in our Western culture, we understand nirvana is equal to heaven. We say, oh, it's like nirvana being here. This dinner is like nirvana. Which, when you understand the word, it makes absolutely no sense. But the word nirvana means, or nibbana in Pali, means blowing out, or extinction, or extinguishing. The image that they use is like if you have a candle or a stick of incense burning in space. And as it consumes the last of the fuel, is gone. No trace. extinction. And this great release, nibbana or nirvana, freedom, liberation, it's called. So I just wanted to sort of give the context of these two perspectives, samsara, nibbana. So realization, awakening. What happens? Because it said that the Buddha awakened when he was 35 years old, realized the mind of nibbana, nirvana. He lived for another 45 years. So what happened? Like, what's that about? How could he become extinct and still live for 45 years? What was it that became extinct? What aspect became extinct? Now, it's said when he dies, when he's 80, that's called parinibbana, or final, like complete nibbana. So, thank you for your patience again. I won't go too much longer. I'm only going to... So, what the Buddha was teaching here is that the Tathagata has awakened to the middle way, which gives rise to vision, which gives rise to knowledge, and leads to peace, to direct knowledge, to awakening, to nibbana. So this is what all of these spiritual practitioners are seeking, is this nibbana, liberation from this wheel of samsara, this cycle of suffering. And what's significant about this teaching is that the Buddha, Siddhartha, shows up to his friends and says, I found it. What, monks, is that middle way awakened to by the Tathagata? This is the noble eightfold path. The word Tathagata is one that I talk about a lot. It's actually one of the words used to describe our school of Zen. Nyorai in Japanese is Tathagata in Sanskrit or Pali. Tathagata is a composite word that comes from two words, Tathagata and Tathagata, Tata agata and tata gata, right? Which is thus coming, thus going. And after his awakening, Siddhartha doesn't call himself Siddhartha anymore. He calls himself the Tathagata, which means the one who has thus come, the one who has thus gone. And this is a significant piece, because it indicates that this perception of himself as an independent, isolated being in the cosmos is gone. What he's saying is the one or the thing or that which has arisen before you and is in the activity of leaving in this moment. He's recognizing and identifying himself as a flowing, transient activity in everything that he does, in everything that he says. Tathagata. This is a pointer or a clue or a help along the way. He says it is this ennobling eightfold path that is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This, monks, is the middle way awakened to by the Tathagata, which gives rise to vision, which gives rise to knowledge and leads to peace, to direct knowledge, to awakening, to nibbana. In Zen, the third noble truth is that there is a path. the noble truth, ennobling truth of the cessation of suffering. It is the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving, the giving up and relinquishing of it, freedom from it, non-attachment. How do you stop suffering? You stop suffering by letting go of that attachment, fixation, and craving. Thank you very much, Buddha. How do you go about doing that? How do you go about uprooting ignorance, desire, and aversion? And he lays out the road, the ennobling eightfold path. Right view, right intention, right speech, and so forth. Right is one translation. Perfect is another translation. Complete is another translation. Whole is another translation. Awakened is another translation. I've heard so many translations. Right I don't like, because I think in our culture, when someone starts talking about the right and the wrong, we get good and evil and God and devil and a whole bunch of things. Maybe complete or whole. And the path, you'll notice, the first part of the path begins with the view. Right view. And this is of crucial importance. If the fundamental mistake we make that leads to suffering is to perceive ourselves as being fundamentally separate, independent, solid, sort of permanent beings that have things and don't have things, that need things and want to be away from things. If this is the basis of our dukkha, suffering, then its opposite, realizing or opening, awakening to the experience of ourselves as one with all things, without self. Anatta is the teaching of no self or no soul, no independent selfhood, not in ourselves, not in any object or anything in this cosmos, all things being made up of transient and transforming elements. Married to this concept of anatta or anatman in Sanskrit, no self, is the principle of shunyata, emptiness. And they're the same, it's the same teaching essentially, because we can think that things, people, somewhere, although we may not be able to see it or identify it or measure it, somewhere like O. Henry bar, like if you take away the chocolate and the peanuts, at the core, there's got to be this sort of like chewy caramel. At the core, there has to be this essence, soul. And the fundamental teaching of Buddhism is that there isn't no self, anatman. The teaching of shunyata, emptiness, or in Zen, is that all things in this cosmos are fundamentally empty of essence, of self, of solidity and separation. All of the other rights or completes that we have here, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, all of these things, in order for them to be complete, they depend on complete view. As long as we maintain the view that we're separate, that we have a soul, that we need things and we don't need things, then if we start trying to engage in right view and right effort and all of those kinds of things, then isn't it the case that our efforts will be misguided? In a lot of ways, we can say if we don't have complete view, we'll get into right effort, right activity, right livelihood, all those kinds of things with the idea of right based on our understanding of self, our belief in separateness, our desire for good and our aversion of bad. So in Zen, this teaching comes up over and over and over again. Shunyata, emptiness, mu. We focus on realizing, awakening to the view. The koan mu. The first koan in the Hekigan Roku, Bodhidharma meets the emperor, is also mu, emptiness, this principle of shunyata. Embodying this, realizing this, awakening to it in every aspect of our lives, seeing this emptiness in every form and every activity that we experience in life is the basis of view, complete view. This is not a nihilistic horror story. Everything is empty. Ah! No. This is not an emptiness that is devoid of characteristic. No. This emptiness is also described as the womb of the Buddhas, prajna paramita, perfect wisdom. It's like saying a wave has no soul, a wave has no essence of its own. We can see it, we can identify it, we can describe it. But in the smallest wave, the characteristic of the whole ocean is present. And this is powerful. Likewise, when we see a flower, it's not a flower that we're seeing. It is the complete presence of the cosmos. The whole thing manifesting as a flower. When we experience the presence of another human being, or a song, or an embrace, or a clap, we're not just hearing some individual isolated thing. We are experiencing the vastness of the cosmos in its entirety in a moment, in a flash. And when we experience this, not as a concept, but when we grasp this in our hearts as an experience ourselves, this is deeply transformative. The idea of being separate dies. The old way of seeing things as little bits broken up and bouncing off one another dies. This is, in Zen, they call it the great death, which scares people and scares them away. But it's wonderful. Because with that death is the death of our fundamental confusion about this world, about this cosmos. And when that confusion is clarified, little bit by little bit through practice, does the wave look at the ocean and say, oh, I need a little more foam, or oh, I need a little bit more seaweed? It knows that it is the ocean. the desire for more foam or more seaweed becomes almost laughable. Already, it is me. Our fixation and attachment and craving and clinging, aversion, they drop away, they diminish. And as these things are the origin of our suffering, we find ourselves, as the saying goes, living a merry and playful samadhi, having a happy life. And in this body, in this very body, given to us by our parents, we awaken the mind of nibbana, extinction. It isn't the extinction of the body. It is the extinction of this self, this idea of a thing or a soul that exists separately from all things in this cosmos.
Thanks for listening to the Living Zen podcast. If you follow Living Zen through iTunes, I would very much appreciate it if you would take a moment to let me know what you think about it by rating or reviewing the podcast, so that new listeners can also hear what you have to say. Thank you for your time and for your support.